He started with the laptop at his kitchen table and went on to build the world's largest and most successful independent financial research firm with more than 1 million readers. His books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies, with some of the world's wealthiest investors keeping copies on their bookshelves. As one of America's most controversial analysts, he rarely makes public predictions. But when he does, he sends shockwaves through the financial industry. He was one of the first to warn investors of the great financial crisis, the collapse of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the demise of General Electric, the bankruptcy of General Motors. And over a decade ago, he predicted the riots, protests, lockdowns, and rampant inflation that have recently consumed America. For each of these predictions, he was mocked, ridiculed, and slandered. But each time he was proven right. And today, he's coming out of retirement to issue a terrifying new warning, one that no one else is willing to speak openly about. In this new investigative video, he will expose how two unelected billionaires have engineered a reset of not just your personal wealth, but the entire US economic system. And how, if you are unprepared, this reset could destroy everything you have worked so hard to achieve. Your 401k, stock portfolio, cash, and bonds. It's all on the brink of being wiped out by these two men. Yet no one is warning you of what's coming, because these two men already control vast swaths of the media, economy, and financial system. Going against them is, frankly, career suicide. But that ends now. Recorded from his 100-acre farm in Maryland, Porter Stansberry is going public with what he says is one of the most important investigations of his life. A message all Americans must pay close attention to before it's too late. Get the facts you won't hear anywhere else. Learn what this means for you, your family, and your money. Everything you need to know starts now.
Our financial system, economy, democracy, even the very soul of our nation is being intentionally destroyed by two men. I know that sounds paranoid, even ridiculous, but please, let me explain. As you'll see, these two billionaires from New York City believe they're doing what's necessary to save the country. And like all fanatics, they believe their crusade is justified, despite the devastation it will unleash upon tens of millions of innocent Americans. Simply put, I believe they're on a mission to dismantle and reset the country, the economy, and even the Constitution, and to implement an entirely new progressive power structure that allows them and their cronies to control everything. And while some of this may be hard to accept at first, deep down, you probably already suspect that something strange is going on in our country. Fair warning, though, you have no idea how far they have already come and how close they are right now to destroying the American way of life. Lockdowns and government control of your private health choices, that's only the beginning. Soon, entire swaths of our economy will be shut down forever. And there's more than just economic targets at risk. All the terrifying and frankly bizarre trends you see unfolding, like our culture's obsession with transgenderism and structural racism and wealth inequality and climate alarmism, all these things are supported, endorsed, and financed by these two men. It's all part of their plan. They want to burn America down so they can rebuild it from scratch, but in their own utopian vision. And in just a few months, millions of hardworking people, rich and poor alike, may experience the unthinkable. I predict that runaway inflation will crush their savings and standard of living, and a collapsing stock market will shatter their retirement plans, their 401ks, their stock portfolios, crypto holdings, cash, and bonds. It's all on the brink of being wiped out. And that won't be the biggest problem. The real problem will be the shock waves that rip our country even further apart, leading to a shocking surge in violence, protests, and economic disruption. Most people will believe the coming catastrophes are all accidents. The media will claim it was unavoidable, a turn of fate. They'll say that no one could have predicted what happened, that no one could have known how much danger America was in, or how everything could have changed so fast. but you'll know better. The proof is right here. Now, I realize that sounds pretty strange. How could two men change our country so much? Well, one of them is the world's largest investor. He manages over 10 trillion worth of assets. That's an amount of capital equal to roughly half of the US GDP. No single individual has ever controlled so much of our nation's wealth ever before. That effectively makes him the boss of hundreds of the most important CEOs in the country, and it allows him to dictate corporate policies across the Fortune 500. There's arguably no more powerful person in the United States, not even the president. There's also no person more responsible for pushing radically liberal political views on America's corporations. The other man is one of his closest colleagues and owns the largest private financial media business in the world. His newsroom controls what the world's business and media leaders read every day. It's his company that frames the narratives that are driving forces in our economy today. Together, these two men control, to a shocking degree, what most other Americans see, hear, and invest in. It's their vision that's shaping our national agenda. And for almost 20 years, they've been forcing their radical beliefs onto the public. What they want to do in America is terrifying. To put it bluntly, they hate the free market. They believe that capitalism is evil and needs to be eradicated. They want to replace it with a new, progressive, and, quote, fairer economic system. They call it stakeholder capitalism. It combines radical environmentalism with fascist forms of income redistribution. It proposes radical wealth redistribution to combat income disparities and to ensure racial equity. It demands that private companies use their resources to help achieve progressive political goals. And their combined efforts are poisoning America from within. Fewer and fewer people believe in the things that made America great. Most Americans no longer believe private industry is more effective than the government, with over half of the nation wanting more intervention from Washington, D.C. And a shocking number of people no longer believe in freedom of speech, of biological gender, or the right to bear arms. Most troubling of all, they've been convinced to embrace tyrannical and authoritarian solutions for anyone who opposes their radical ideas. All these changes have serious cultural impacts, but that's not even the worst part. They are changing our financial markets permanently, and in ways that I believe will have profoundly negative impacts on our economy, your personal wealth, and the future of our country. That's why it's absolutely critical that you understand what undergirds these outrageous lies. The lie that capitalism has failed, the lie that America is evil, the lie that freedom doesn't work. I believe it's the only way to grow your wealth in the months and years ahead, because as you're about to see, the financial landscape has changed forever. You have probably never heard of Larry Fink, but he is, arguably by far, the most powerful man in America. He has the power to decide, quite literally, which companies will thrive and which will die. How? Fink is the CEO of the largest asset management company in the world, BlackRock. BlackRock's ETFs and mutual funds hold over $10 trillion in assets. It is the biggest, richest, and most powerful firm in all of capitalism. To put this number in context, there are many who worry about the control people like George Soros exert on our democracy, our corporations, and our politicians. But Soros's fund only manages $28 billion. That's less than 3% of BlackRock's holdings. And Larry Fink pulls the puppet strings of the market far more than anyone else. Since 2012, he has been writing to the CEOs of every public company he controls to demand that they abandon shareholder capitalism and instead embrace stakeholder capitalism. This is the belief that companies shouldn't be accountable only to their shareholders, but also to the environment, a progressive social agenda, and a new form of corporate governance. This so-called ESG movement takes power away from the real owners of a corporation and hands the reins to various consultants and political interests. Stakeholder capitalism, in short, is socialism. It's simply a new way for the elites to take control of every public company in America. And Larry Fink will be instrumental in this economic coup d'etat. He has co-opted a huge portion of America's retirement savings and is using it to push for a new socialist agenda in America. And virtually no one has connected the dots on what he's doing. But he is the puppet master behind almost all of the seemingly bizarre corporate decisions you've seen recently in the news. ExxonMobil announcing it aims to transition away from fossil fuels and giving 25% of its board seats to radical environmentalists. Gillette launching an advertising campaign to fight, quote, toxic masculinity. Or NASDAQ Inc. pushing a plan to force companies to set minimum targets of at least 2 diverse board members. Perhaps the most illustrative example of Fink's sway over corporate America is the recent debacle at Disney. On March 28, 2022, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a law prohibiting teaching about homosexuality before the 3rd grade. Now, I don't care about anybody's sexual preference, but most reasonable people would agree, I think, that sex education isn't appropriate material for 1st graders and kindergartners. Gay activists and a handful of Disney's employees, however, vehemently oppose the Don't Say Gay law with various forms of lobbying and public relations. And incredibly, Disney sided with this tiny minority of radicals who want to sexually indoctrinate very young children. Tell me, why would a company that primarily serves children oppose a law that is clearly designed to protect kids from inappropriate sexual content at school? Why would they risk alienating their core audience, the parents of young children? Normally, Disney wouldn't do this. But Larry Fink's firm, BlackRock, owns more than 6% of the stock, making it the 2nd largest shareholder. And Fink's letter to his CEOs this year specifically talked about the importance of treating employees as stakeholders, whether they own shares or not. Furthermore, Larry explicitly threatened CEOs that don't adhere to his radical ESG philosophy, warning them in a recent letter. Companies not adjusting to this new reality and responding to their workers do so at their own peril. Yet, despite the backlash, the obvious economic ramifications, and angry letters from shareholders and parents, Disney bowed to Fink's wishes. Unsurprisingly, Disney stock has been crushed, with shares plunging as low as $94. That's a drop of over 50% from the recent highs. Now, for any regular American holding Disney stock, this is a catastrophic loss with real-world financial consequences. For the ESG zealots, however, it's a win. You see, in stakeholder capitalism, the share price is not as important as the adherence to the correct political ideology. It's anti-capitalistic, it's anti-American, it's insane. And it's coming to thousands of companies, many of which will see similar cataclysmic crashes in their share price. However, this is what the crusaders of ESG and woke capitalism want. And they're not stopping with individual companies. They're targeting capitalism itself. How are they targeting capitalism itself? By canceling not just individuals, but any company that doesn't embrace their progressive political goals. As you may know, America's credit rating agencies play a critical role in determining which firms can get access to credit and at what price. They assign ratings to every bond that's sold in the United States. The bond market is way, way bigger than the stock market. It's where companies go to borrow money to finance their operations and expansion. Without access to the bond market, it's virtually impossible for any large company to grow or to even stay in business. That's why what happens in the bond market is far more important to capitalism than just about anybody realizes. Without the bond market, the whole economy dies. That's why the credit rating agencies are so powerful. They essentially control access to the capital markets. Credit ratings largely determine whether and under what terms a company, a state, or a municipality can borrow money in the United States. And the three leading credit rating agencies have all recently added a new kind of rating to their credit reviews. It's an ESG rating. That means that virtually every corporation in the world will have to toe the line and support progressive views about the environment, social progress, and woke governance. That means in the US, companies can be canceled if they don't support teaching homosexuality to kindergartners, or if they don't support allowing their employees to designate their own genders and use whatever bathroom they want. It also means that companies that make products or serve markets that are currently out of political fashion can be canceled too. Gun and ammunition manufacturers, for example, or perhaps most importantly, companies that produce hydrocarbons. There's no escaping the truth. An ESG dominated capital market is the end of freedom in the United States. It assigns ownership rights to people who aren't owners. It makes corporate boards accountable to political masters instead of their legitimate shareholders. And in doing so, it removes the rights of actual shareholders. Most worryingly, though, all of this is just one of the ways these two men are systematically destroying America and ushering in their utopian socialist dream. Michael Bloomberg is, like Larry Fink, one of the most powerful men in the world. And like Larry, he is on a mission to destroy America's free market system so it can be rebuilt to his far left fantasy. Except while Larry Fink works to manipulate C-suite executives and corporate boards, Michael Bloomberg is manipulating you, the general public. And while you obviously know Michael Bloomberg's name, you probably don't know just how powerful he personally is, or just how radical. He owns 88% of Bloomberg LP, which is a huge financial media company with 176 offices around the world. Bloomberg's terminals, which cost $22,500 per user per year, sit on virtually every desk on Wall Street and connect all of the world's financial markets. For many years, Bloomberg's media company has been the world's insider media company. It's what senior corporate executives watch and where most of corporate America gets its news. But about 10 years ago, as Bloomberg's New York mayoral term was ending and his presidential ambitions were gaining traction, his media business expanded massively into mainstream news. Under a new CEO, Dan Doctorhoff, Bloomberg LP hired 2,300 journalists and placed them in 72 countries around the world. Doctorhoff also bought Businessweek, which had gone bankrupt because of declining interest in magazines. Why would Bloomberg invest so heavily in a news operation when the news business was failing? Why would he buy a failed magazine? Even a decade after Bloomberg News was created, Bloomberg LP received most of its revenue from its expensive terminals. From a financial perspective, Bloomberg News doesn't make any sense unless you understand what its real purpose is. As Dr. Hoff told the American Journalism Review, his goal was to build the most influential news organization in the world. And how has he used that power? In my opinion, more than any other human being in the world, Michael Bloomberg is responsible for the ridiculous notion that the climate is on the verge of disaster and that we must stop fossil fuel use completely in order to save mankind. Now, to be clear, I am not denying climate change, but I am denying climate alarmism and prophecies that the world will end in 12 years. Now, how Bloomberg has propagated this myth is brilliantly evil. He did it by corrupting the underlying science of climate change. In 2013, he partnered with two other radical environmentalists, Hank Paulson, the former Treasury Secretary and head of Goldman Sachs, and Tom Steyer, the hedge fund billionaire and failed presidential candidate. They put together a $100 million fund to create a political and special interest campaign called Risky Business. The goal? To make the climate threat feel real, immediate, and potentially devastating to the business world. In order to achieve this, Risky Business has manipulated the underlying scientific data beyond all recognition. The reports Risky Business began publishing in 2014 conflated and compared entirely different models to create the impression that the most catastrophic potential outcome, called RCP 8.5 in scientific journals, was inevitable without reducing carbon emissions to zero. As Roger Pilk, a professor at the University of Colorado who specializes in the connection between science and government, has detailed, dodgy science published by climate advocacy groups is certainly not uncommon, and it is usually not that interesting. But the genius of the Risky Business project was that it did not stop with a flashy report aimed at the daily news cycle. It undertook a far more sophisticated campaign focused on introducing its methods into the mainstream scientific literature, where they could take on a life of their own. In other words, almost all of the mainstream ideas about climate change and the imminent dangers it poses can be linked directly to Michael Bloomberg. However, spreading propaganda into the official record was only the beginning. More recently, Michael Bloomberg has commandeered the legal system to attack fossil fuel companies directly. In 2017, Bloomberg Philanthropies funded a center for environmental litigation called the State Energy and Environmental Impact Center. According to the Competitive Enterprise Institute, this entity provides prosecutors to the Attorney General's office for pro bono work, suing energy companies for global warming. Their dream is to create a tobacco-like industry settlement that will provide billions of dollars to politicians, giving them still more power in our economy. As the Competitive Enterprise Institute wrote, the extension of this billion-dollar per year climate industry to privately fund AG investigations sets a dangerous precedent. It represents private interests commandeering the state's police powers to target opponents of their policy agenda and to hijack the justice system as a way to overturn the democratic process's rejection of a political agenda. And Bloomberg's plan is working. Not only do many Americans believe that climate change is an existential threat, but he's succeeded in closing more than 60% of all U.S. coal plants since 2011 and more than half of all European plants since 2016. Of course, elites like Bloomberg and Fink never pause to consider that carbon-based power has lifted billions from poverty over the last 50 years, or that fossil fuels still provide more than 80% of the world's energy supply. According to Ronald Stein, the Pulitzer Prize-nominated author, trying to live without fossil fuels could result in billions, not millions, of fatalities from diseases, malnutrition, and weather-related deaths. No, to Bloomberg and his ilk, the deadline to stop using fossil fuels was yesterday, and the consequences be damned. And in the same way, the credit rating agencies are attempting to limit companies' access to capital unless they support stakeholder capitalism. These combined decade-long efforts from Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg have already had severe economic and financial consequences. Inflation is crushing real consumer incomes, compounded by higher borrowing costs, pushing more and more Americans out of the middle class. Since 2002, the share of wealth held by the middle class has dropped from 36% to 28%, while the top 1% of Americans have amassed more than ever. And this alarming trend shows no signs of slowing. Just take a look at the collapse in real wages, which are plunging at the fastest rate in 40 years. It's a disaster. But my research proves far worse is coming. And it's critical for you to understand that these ESG warriors are not going to stop until they achieve their goal. They are going to continue to corrupt our culture, our legal system, our financial system, and even capitalism itself, all because they fear that a world they do not control from the top down will spiral into a catastrophe. And that, my friend, is the scariest part. You see, these two men, they're not evil. No. They fundamentally believe what they're doing is for the greater good. And they believe that the ends justify the means. They will stop at nothing to achieve their socialist dream of stakeholder capitalism and ESG economics. Your 401k, stock holdings, cash, and other assets, they're of no importance to these coastal elites. And if they get crushed, well, you can console yourself in the knowledge that it was all for the greater good and the achievement of their vision. Or, if you're like me, you can fight back. Much of what I've told you today may seem dark. It may seem like there is no way to protect your wealth from the wholesale economic and financial reset planned by Bloomberg and Fink. However, as I'll share with you in just a moment, there is a flaw in their plan to destroy America. And it's a flaw you can exploit. So that means whether you are enriched or impoverished by this coming reset depends on what you do today. For those who choose to bury their head in the sand, everything they've worked so hard to build is on the verge of being wiped out. However, for those who read the writing on the wall and are bold enough to act early and decisively, they have the opportunity to not only safeguard their wealth, but potentially grow it tenfold or more in the years ahead. Because the upheaval triggered by this attempted takeover of America has opened the doors to the opportunity of a lifetime. I expect the potential returns for those who act now will be greater than anything I've recommended before. And that's saying something, considering I was among the first to recommend Amazon.com back in 1997 when it was just an online bookstore and trading at $1.50. Or Microsoft in 2006 when it was just $26 a share. Or Shopify, NVIDIA, Illumina, Apple, Regeneron, and many other incredible businesses. I was also among the first analysts anywhere to predict that the rise of new telecommunication technologies would create a new internet economy, and that the panic around peak oil was simply a lie. However, I believe this story is bigger and far more important than all the stories that I've written before. This crusade of Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg and their mission to destroy America and usher in a new economic system that they control, it has a flaw. And that's the fact that their manipulation of the markets has real-world consequences for regular people. Case in point, inflation is out of control. For almost a year now, it's been hovering around 8%. That's 4 times higher than the Fed's official goal of 2%. A number the Federal Reserve now admits won't be achieved again until at least 2025. Food costs are up 11% from last year, with staples like bread increasing 16%, chicken up by 16%, and milk jumping 17%. What's more, no matter how the Biden administration tries to spin it, many sectors of the U.S. economy are already in a recession. The bottom line, the shockwaves from Larry Fink and Michael Bloomberg's meddling in our economy are starting to hit regular Americans. The early signs of economic distress we are seeing now will soon snowball into a full-blown multi-year recession. And while the wealthy elites aren't impacted by this, millions of hardworking Americans are forced to deal with the impact of stakeholder capitalism. As millions more people descend into financial insecurity, even poverty, there will be rebellion against this woke capitalism. And one of the first areas you will see this rebellion take place is the energy sector. You see, every single industry depends on the energy sector. Travel, transportation, healthcare, education, manufacturing, medicine, engineering, agriculture, construction. None of these industries function without energy. As Credit Suisse explains, without energy, everything comes crashing to a halt. That's why it's been called the single most important driver for the overall economy, and why globally it's a multi-trillion-dollar sector. For tens of thousands of years, it has fueled civilization, from primitive campfires and medieval water mills to steam engines and coal-burning factories. There has never been and will never be a time when humanity doesn't need energy. And as our economy grows, we need more and more energy than ever. And right now, as a direct result of the ESG and stakeholder capitalism crusade from Larry Fink and Mike Bloomberg, energy costs and demands are spiraling out of control all around the world. In Europe, shortages of electricity and natural gas have forced shutdowns of everything ranging from steel to plastics to chemical manufacturing. And these problems won't be constrained to Europe. They're coming to America too. It's only a matter of time. And while the Ivy League elites lecture us that wind, solar, and other renewables are the only answer and the only way forward, the cold, hard fact is that there is zero chance of renewables ever producing enough low-cost energy to fuel the world. As the Manhattan Institute reported, thinking that wind and solar can ever replace fossil fuels is nothing but an exercise in magical thinking. Even the former CEO of the Clean Energy Council, an organization devoted to renewable energy, has had to come face to face with reality, admitting it's a cage fight with the laws of physics. The truth is, it's only carbon-based fuels that can provide enough energy to power the world's insatiable demand for energy. And that presents you and me with one of the greatest single opportunities I've ever come across in my 25-year career. Over the last several years, as climate alarmism has grown to a fever pitch, fossil fuel production has fallen drastically. That's because of the drop in capital spending across the industry, which remains 30% below pre-COVID levels, despite far higher energy prices. This decline in fossil fuel production, especially here in America, is already having serious economic consequences. And the longer it lasts, the worse it will get. As Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, bluntly put it to squad member Rashida Tlaib, stopping fossil fuel production would be the road to hell for America. And in order to avert a full-scale energy crisis, both here and abroad, America needs to produce and export a lot more natural gas, roughly 50% more, which is around 50 billion cubic feet per day more. Fortunately, those rates of production are possible, and fortunately, we have enough reserves to last 50 years or more. Our energy complex can be mobilized to dramatically increase production and help reduce the prices and provide energy security for our allies. Construction can begin on vast new natural gas export capabilities, and we can ship gas across the Atlantic and power the electric grids from London to Istanbul. Along the way, investors in natural gas production and infrastructure will make a fortune, which is part of the reason why I've written this report. There's only one catch. None of these things are going to happen until the Biden administration changes its tune and realizes that radicals like Larry Fink and Michael Bloomberg are destroying America's economy. And with millions of Americans already suffering from historic inflation, rising interest rates, plunging stocks, and a recession, Biden and the Democrats' only hope of maintaining power is to change course on fossil fuel investment and infrastructure. Producing more fossil fuel energy is the only way to provide for a growing economy, an increasing standard of living, and an increasing population. They can't use coal or gasoline, though, because the progressives, led by people like Fink and Bloomberg, have spent decades decrying them. The only solution? America's vast natural gas resources. Over the next 6 to 12 months, it will become clear that the best, the safest, and the cleanest way to grow the world's economy is by using more of America's natural gas. These changes are inevitable. Why? Because there's no other way to ensure the reliability and the affordability of electricity around the world. And right now, only a handful of companies are holding the right cards. That means the number one way to protect yourself from stakeholder capitalism, America's descent into socialism, and this recession is to invest in the most important and best positioned U.S. oil and gas companies. I'm not the only one who has seen the writing on the wall either. The world's best investor, Warren Buffett, has been making huge investments in oil and gas like never before. His firm, Berkshire Hathaway, has increased its stake in Occidental Petroleum to 27%. This is only the beginning, though, as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has granted Buffett approval to buy up to 50% of the available stock. And many analysts believe he will eventually make a bid to purchase the entire company. In fact, Buffett's oil and gas investments this year are among the biggest bets he's ever made. Just how big? Well, Buffett's total cost basis for Coca-Cola was $1.3 billion. And he started buying Apple in 2016 and bought $6.7 billion that year. Coca-Cola and Apple are right at the top of his signature stock picks and best performers. His energy investments for the past year, over $29 billion. When history's most successful investor makes his biggest stock bet over a 12-month period, you know it's time to act. You see, Warren knows the supply and demand characteristics in U.S. oil and natural gas haven't been this favorable since the 1970s. That's why I recently hired 2 full-time energy analysts and moved them to Maryland from Texas and Florida. Together, our focus has been on understanding how the biggest natural gas resources in America are most likely to be developed and how they will eventually be sold and delivered into the world market. We have found an incredible story about 3 brothers who have built the largest natural gas producer in America from scratch over the last decade. They are transitioning their company right now to become an export-focused global liquid natural gas giant. Over the next decade, I predict investors in this company could potentially make 10 times their money. It's the biggest disruption in the world's energy markets in 100 years. And you've never heard anything about it. For the last 50 years, the quest for energy security has dominated foreign policy of all the great powers, including the United States. Thus, Saudi Arabia has always been given a pass, no matter what happened. Even the country's ties to the 9/11 terrorists were swept under the rug. But the world's market for energy is about to be turned upside down forever. And in another decade, no one will need Saudi oil anymore. Before the end of this year, the first international end-to-end production and distribution deal for American shale gas will be struck by a leading fracker, a small, independent oil and gas firm whose production is centered on the largest natural gas reserve in the world, the Marcellus Shale. This Pittsburgh company, launched just over a decade ago, will soon become the first super major energy company to emerge from America's shale resources. This firm, which I bet you've never heard of, has suddenly, virtually overnight, become the largest producer of U.S. natural gas. It'll soon be the world's biggest and most important energy company. Let me say that again. A little Pittsburgh company will soon be one of the most powerful energy companies in the whole world. While that may seem hard to believe, it's the simple facts of the matter. And if you take one thing from this presentation, remember these words. This company sits on a resource that's so big and is growing production so much, it will soon become the world's most important energy company. The company's growth over the last 3 years has been explosive. After a long period of exploration and drilling, it has been able to ramp production and dramatically increase its margins through scale. It has also made a number of brilliant bolt-on acquisitions, gaining additional reserves and pipelines. Here are the numbers. In 2019, the company was producing $250 million in free cash flow. That's profits that can be distributed to owners. Then in 2020, the company virtually doubled to $495 million in cash flow. In 2021, free cash flow grew 22% to $607 million. But the real growth is still coming. In the first half of 2022, the company returned $1.3 billion in capital to investors, and it raised its free cash flow estimate for the full year by 50% to $2.35 billion. And all of that was before its most recent deal. In early September, the gods of gas announced another incredible deal to acquire about 15% more production, 11 years worth of additional reserves, and miles of valuable pipelines. The company didn't add any debt, buying the assets for cash on hand and some stock. On the heels of this latest deal, the company projected its share buyback for the year would double. We expect the company to produce more free cash flow over the next 4 years, $5 billion a year, than the value of the entire company today. How's that possible? How did these brothers from Pittsburgh take a small, Regional also ran Shale Gas Company and turned it into an economic engine that produces tens of billions of free cash flow and is the largest producer of natural gas in the United States. The brothers didn't merely cut costs, they also struck a deal with an oil major, a huge deal. In the fall of 2020, the pandemic sent oil and gas prices to decade lows. The oil major wrote off its entire Marcellus investment. In fact, it took an $8 billion write-off. So the gods of gas paid only $735 million for the oil major's entire Marcellus operation. They stole it. The deal, worth 800,000 acres, assures the brothers' publicly traded company will remain the dominant provider of Marcellus natural gas for decades. If the world wants to have reliable electricity without burning coal, natural gas is the only proven energy source that's reliable enough and affordable. There is no other real-world solution. Don't tell the snowflakes. How much gas could the gods of gas eventually produce? The company currently claims 23 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in proven reserves. But the truth is, no one really knows for sure how much more natural gas will be recovered because as drilling technology improves, the amount of gas that's recoverable continues to grow a lot. Scientists from Penn State University now claim up to 400 trillion cubic feet of gas is recoverable in the Marcellus Basin. However, these same estimates have been increasing over time, from 2 trillion 20 years ago to 84 trillion 10 years ago to 97 trillion most recently. These increases aren't related to how much natural gas is in the rocks, but instead, the growth comes from technology's ability to extract it profitably. And in that regard, this company has always been a market leader. The company's proven reserves have doubled since 2016, and it owns over 1 million acres in the Marcellus. It's a safe bet that the company's reserves will continue to grow for decades. To put this into context, the Marcellus probably contains more natural gas than all of the other natural gas producing areas in the United States combined, and probably more natural gas than every other producing nation except Russia, Iran, and Qatar. The Marcellus isn't merely a big gas field. It's one of the largest reserves of energy in the world. And this company is the best operator with the most production and the biggest reserves. Its development will not only change the United States' economy, it will also reshape the global energy map for the rest of our lives. No one will produce more natural gas from the Marcellus or in America for the next 30 years at least. What does this mean for you in dollars and cents? A company like this one that's producing reliable free cash flows of $5 billion annually with a proven growth strategy should be worth at least $100 billion, or 4 times more than the stock's current price. But that projection is extremely conservative. It is based on an average price of gas below $4 per MCF, despite current prices over $8 per MCF. It's also based on the company not doing any more attractive acquisitions, which it almost certainly will do. And there's the possibility of vastly more profits if, as the company has said it will, it invests in building its own LNG facilities and pipelines to reach the global markets for natural gas, where prices are typically well above $10 per MCF. That's why I wouldn't be surprised to see the gods of gas earn returns of 10 times investors' money over the next 10 years. This is a great investment, as good as an investment as I have ever found in my 25-year career. And it's why I want to give you access to my latest investors briefing that covers this story and opportunity in exacting detail. It's called The Gods of Gas, and I'll tell you how to get your hands on it in just a moment. First, though, I want to tell you about another opportunity that's been unleashed by the energy crisis wrought by stakeholder capitalism and ESG. It has even more upside than the gods of gas because it's only beginning to assemble its acreage and build its pipelines and LNG facilities. The best part is the founder. He's the man who started the entire LNG boom in the United States, building the first independent, non-major oil company LNG export facility between 2010 and 2014. It's a stock that has gone from around $5 to over $150 a share, a return of almost 3,000%. Now he's about to do it again. Currently in the US, there are only 8 LNG export terminals. The newest is Venture Global's Calcasieu Pass in Louisiana, and it is privately owned. There are, however, 2 other new LNG plants that are approved and currently under construction, and these are both publicly traded. One belongs to a partnership between a super major oil company, ExxonMobil, and Qatar. Called Golden Pass, it's located along the Gulf Coast at Sabine Pass, Texas. You can, of course, invest in ExxonMobil, but it's such a huge company that even if it makes a lot of extra money with this new LNG facility, it probably won't move the needle for Exxon's share price. But the other new, fully permitted LNG facility that's being built is owned by a small company whose founder, as I mentioned, has experience building greenfield LNG facilities. This new company, known as Driftwood in energy circles, has a unique business model that's designed solely to serve international markets for energy. Its plan is to acquire natural gas wells in the Haynesville Shale, that's in Louisiana, and transport that production via pipeline to a new LNG plant it's building on the Gulf Coast. The Driftwood pipeline and LNG plant is a $12 billion piece of energy infrastructure that has the potential to become one of the most valuable energy infrastructure facilities in the world. It's going to be financed in part from its own natural gas production. And most likely, the project will be purchased even before it's completed by a supermajor like Shell, which has spent 50 years developing LNG assets all around the world. Such a deal could lead to huge profits for investors in a very short amount of time. Of course, this kind of an investment isn't like buying the gods of gas. This is still a very small company. Its share price is going to be very volatile. Moves up or down of 50% or more won't be unusual as prices for natural gas change, as prices for LNG change, and as financing options for the Driftwood facility materialize. The next big move for the stock will come when it announces major funding for the next phase of the project. Once that happens, I wouldn't be surprised to see the market cap move above 10 billion, or about 5 times its current share price. An announcement like that could come at any time. As I detail inside the next LNG giant, I believe this company will be worth at least $100 billion in 10 years. That's 50 times what it is worth right now. And you can get in right now before this company becomes the next juggernaut of the global energy market. To get access to both of these urgent opportunities, the gods of gas and the next LNG giant, all you have to do is sign up for a trial of my new research service.